I am not letting my negative self-talk ruin my business. So I promised myself that that day I was going to take control. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I have to just keep growing, keep going, and keep evolving. And that is the most important thing to me. And every year I say, okay, what's the focus this year? I have to do things to keep myself on the straight and narrow now. But they're the things that I have to do to change my energy. In those rock bottom moments, I realised that actually I love myself. And I deserve to live. And I deserve a great, healthy, long life. So I started to think about giving away that 100% energy every day. And I thought to myself, what if I had just kept 1% for me? And you start to invest some real proper time into yourself. The world responds. If you want people to believe in you, if you want people to buy your product, invest in your business, give you that promotion, if you don't believe in yourself, it's obvious to people.
Series 8 of the Dig podcast. I can't believe it, guys. We are over 250,000 downloads. The growth of the podcast has been amazing. But I just have one thing I'm asking of you guys today. If you love listening to the Dig podcast and you love all the new guests each week, then I'm asking if you could hit subscribe or follow. So if you listen on Apple or Spotify, if you could hit follow, and if you watch on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. It means the podcast reaches more people. When I reach out, people actually have heard of the Dig podcast, they know about it, and they're more willing to be a guest. And then I'm able to bring even more actionable advice to you guys. So it's really, really it really helps the podcast grow. So I'm asking for your help on that point today, and I just can't wait to dive into this series, and I can't wait for you to hear from our next guest.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Dig podcast. So we're on Zoom again this week, and I'm very grateful for Zoom. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to reach the people that I'm actually reaching with the Dig podcast. I'm bringing the most unreal guests. So today on the Dig podcast, you all know her anyway. I absolutely don't doubt that, Georgie Crawford. So for those who possibly don't, Georgie is the creator of The Good Glow. Now, The Good Glow, whenever I was doing all my notes, it's much more than when I didn't really know, like a few years ago, I thought it was just a podcast, but it's so much more. So if you go on to Georgie's website, she's got events, she's got her book, and she does speaking with lots of different workplaces and one-to-ones. And she's just helping people more than, I don't know if she really realizes, but helping people change their lives and take action. And unreal, like when I was going through the podcast, everything, or through her website, everything that she's done. But she didn't always do this like most of us. She's evolved in her life and her career. And she used to be a radio presenter and do lots of things on the radio. And that's where she met her lovely husband, Jamie. And she's also a mummy to 2 wee girls, and just like all of us, just juggling like being a wife and a mum and or a dad and a husband. So she's got a lot going on, but she's rocking it at the minute. She talks about whenever we did our prep call, because I always do that before we come on the podcast, because I want to know how I can get all the information that I know you guys want and need. And she talked about her life, like working and revolving in this job, and wasn't really fulfilled. Did she really know herself? Was she really, at her happiest? And she talks about walking away from that job. That was what she'd always dreamed of, and because she wasn't fulfilled. But we do have that big thing that comes into a lot of people's lives about health, and how she had her cancer diagnosis, and that made her reevaluate. And I'll ask her in the podcast, is that what it's going to take for us? Are we going to be able to change before that happens? I don't want to ruin our conversation, but just if you're listening at the start, the nuggets you're going to get today, like burnout. She talked about burnout in her own work now, and how she had to set boundaries. And that's so hard for all of us. Like, we're working flipping late at night. We don't know when to stop. We're the grind and just thinking that's what it takes. And is it? And how do we stop that cycle? I'm going to ask her for you guys and for myself as well. And also about starting a podcast. So I feel like, I do podcasts, but I look at Georgie, I'm like, oh my God, she's got that all going on. She's brilliant at it, and I want to know how she does it. And has she any tips for people who want to get started? Because I really am only started on my journey. So I was going to be jam-packed, and we're going to get her away because she's another podcast after. It's very busy, but she's right here with me now, listening to all of that. Welcome to the Dig podcast, Georgie.
Wow, hello, and what an introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, here, it's not even a drop in the ocean compared to what it should be, but thank you for agreeing to be here this morning. And you messaged me and said, are we recording this? Well, she's got her babies on there and her kids on there. So obviously you've came online here and we both have our lippy on and we're ready for action, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's so nice to be here, and what you're doing is really special. So thank you for asking me.
No, thank you for saying yes. And I suppose everybody knows this series. I've teamed up with Una from Mars Pharmacy. So she's connecting me with all these people that I never, honestly, in my heart, never thought that I could reach, because it's hard. But actually, Georgie, I did a podcast with Kingsley Aikens last week, and he talked about you get to know people through other people that know those people, and just like reaching out and all of that. So we're here today, I think, thankfully, because Una reached out, but maybe our paths would have hopefully crossed anyway. But let's go for it. So people are listening, Georgie. There are people in the world of work, people who are just trying to do things better and be the best. Not, Jerry Hussey taught me it's not the best to be better at what they do, not the best. He taught me that yesterday. So I'm trying to put his things into practice as well. But where did it all start for you? Like what we talked about the radio. Tell us about those days.
Yeah, God, the good old days. I really believe we're in the good old days right now. And actually on one of our pieces of merch, I always say it, these are the good old days. And just to kind of anchor down in that and remember that as we go through life and things are busy and we're juggling so many things, these are the days that we'll look back and say, those are the good old days. So I guess I look at my life as almost like a before and after. So in my before life, I worked in radio. I worked there for 10 years. I studied journalism in college, and I was really eager to get out into the workplace and put my stamp on things. I loved radio. I loved just being a voice. I worked in the newsroom. So I didn't have the pressure of kind of having my own show and listenership and all that sort of stuff. So I went in, I gave it my all, and I ended up staying in Spin, where I started my radio career for 10 years. And I loved radio. It was evolving at the time, and I was kind of involved in, social media. And I remember knocking on the CEO's door and saying, we need to get on this thing called Twitter. And so I guess I was multitasking, but my business would not be what it is today without my background in radio.
And whenever you were there, like, you loved it, but you were, like, you told me that, tell me about the lunch hour thing that added up over that everyone does, and how, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so my dream was to work at 98 FM, which was the sister station of Spin, and we all shared an office. And I remember everyone in 98 FM had to walk past my desk to get to the bathroom, get to the kitchen, get out the door. So I wanted to prove to everyone in 98 FM that I was a really hard worker and that I was worthy of working with them. Because I saw 98 FM as kind of like the end goal. It was like the big grown-up station. I always said, if I work in 98 FM, then I'll be a real journalist. Then I'll prove to myself that I'm good enough, to work in this industry. So everybody in 98 FM used to walk past my desk, and I remember thinking, well, if I work really hard and they see that, then I'll get that promotion. So I decided never to leave my desk at lunchtime. I ate my breakfast at my desk, my lunch at my desk. I worked overtime. I was the yes man in the office. I was doing the job of 3 people. I just wanted everyone to see how much of a great job I was doing. And actually, as I was writing my book Glow last year, I counted up, if we worked through our lunch break every day for, say, 10 years, which is what I did. Say you work on average 48 weeks a year. That's 2,400 hours over 10 years that you have not taken for yourself. Now, I know everyone doesn't get an hour lunch break, and it's easier said than done. But even if I had taken a couple of minutes a day to go outside, to walk around the block, to embrace silence, to infuse time in my day, what could have changed? But I guess I was so focused on the external, what people thought of me if I was doing a good enough job, that I became so frozen over time and so disconnected to myself that actually when I got sick and I got my cancer diagnosis, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know actually what have I been trying to work towards? What was I doing for 10 years? And that was a big full stop in my life. And that was the end of my before.
And whenever I'm listening to that, like, such a traumatic time to have your cancer diagnosis and go through the treatment and stuff, and there's people listening and they're at their desk now and they're listening to this and they're working while they're listening and they're working while they should be taking their lunch break. What does it take to break that cycle? That doesn't mean a health scare. Like, I mean, does it take that huge thing to happen to make us change, do you believe? Or is there some way we can break this? Or
yeah, it begins, I think, with and I wrote about the 5 steps, you know, to create a better life for yourself in my book, and they're basic steps. So I think the first step is to listen to yourself, to connect with yourself, to check in and say, actually, how am I doing? Wait a minute, what have I been doing for the last few years? When is the last time that I stopped to listen to that voice in my head? When do I connect with myself? When do I embrace time? And then to become curious. You know, I when I worked in radio, I thought I knew it all. I left college and I said, I will never study in my life again, because I was a real worker my whole life. I got my first job when I was 15. So I said, that's it, I'm done with learning. When actually we need to learn, and we need to expand our mind every single day, especially if we want to create a successful business or a successful career for ourselves. So I cut myself off from all of these things. And that's why with the 5 steps in my book, I just wanted to create a really simple 5-step process that people can follow in order to just open their mind. And then I believe that by doing that, that's when everything starts to speed up in your external world.
And is there another, so opening up your mind, is there any other tip there? Not to give away all your tips in your books, but is there anything else that we should be doing? One more thing maybe along those lines, or for trying to break that cycle?
Yeah, I think it's to be kind to yourself. And I was so mean to myself for 10 years. I mean, when I think back to that girl, and I speak about this in my corporate talks all the time, I speak about that girl that was sitting at her desk in Spain as everyone in 98 FM walked past again and again and again. And they'd look at me and they'd say, oh, there's Georgie, like our colleague. She's great crack. We love her. She's a kind person. But inside, if you could play the stories that I was telling myself in my head for the world to hear, people would have been stunned, shocked. I mean, I sat at my desk every day and told myself I wasn't good enough to work in 98 FM. I wasn't intelligent enough to read the news on 98 FM, that I didn't do a real journalism degree because I went to private college. And year after year, I just beat myself up again and again and again. And actually, I made myself so small that I didn't feel like I was worthy of the promotion. And if you want people to believe in you, if you want people to buy your product, invest in your business, give you that promotion, make you the CEO of the company you work for, if you don't believe in yourself, it's obvious to people. And I really believe that it starts with the relationship with yourself, with your personal development, what you're investing in yourself every single day. And I promise you, when you do that, when you change the voices, the stories in your head, and you start to invest some real proper time into yourself, the world responds.
And you talked about giving, was it give 1% more every day for yourself? Was it 1% we talked about, or 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that it? 15
Yeah.
minutes? Talk to me about that.
So what I remember, I'd sit in my garden when I was going through chemotherapy. So I had 5 months of chemotherapy. I lost every single blade of hair on my body. I was 32. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, and this is kind of a morbid thought, right? But I always imagined if I had cancer that it would be my older face looking back at me in the mirror. I remember looking at my young face. You know, I was 32. I didn't have wrinkles. I was really a baby with cancer. And I remember just thinking to myself, God, what if I had just been a bit kinder to myself? What if I had given myself more time? So my husband, Jamie, he was diagnosed with MS when we were dating. And I suppose our whole lives revolved around his health, and we didn't make that decision. We didn't sit down, at the table and make the decision to only concentrate on Jamie's health. But we fall into that trap sometimes when we're caring for an older parent, say who's ill, or a child, or a partner, and we forget about ourselves because we want them to be well. Of course we do. So subconsciously then we sacrifice our own health. We skip our gym session to facilitate that person being well. Or I remember I speak about this in my book as well, the burnt potato. I used to eat, if I burnt a corner of the dish for dinner, I would eat the burnt food because I wanted Jamie to feel well. So year after year, I did that until I found myself then, as my 7-month-old baby would nap for 2 hours a day when I was in treatment, sitting in my garden in my dressing gown with, no hair. And I remember thinking, like, how did this happen? How did I get here? Now, I'm not saying that my cancer diagnosis was my fault, but what I realized in those moments of my rock bottom was that if I got a chance to live, if I got a chance to survive this, that things were going to be different for me. And I wasn't, as much as I love everybody in my life, as much as I love my job, I wasn't going to give 100% of my energy away every single day. Because in those rock bottom moments, I realized that actually I love myself and I deserve to live and I deserve a great, healthy, long life. So the only way that I can get there is to do it myself. So I started to think about giving away that 100% energy every day. And I thought to myself, what if I had just kept 1% for me? What if I had got up from my desk when my shift was over and walked out the door? What if I had said, no, I need a lunch break? Nobody would have tied me to my desk and wouldn't let me out the door for lunch. I chose that. So I said to myself, if I get a second chance at life, things are going to be different for me. And the only reason that I had those breakthroughs was time. Because before I never had any time. I was always rushing on to the next thing. But with that time, I got time to reflect and think about things and really put my life in order. And when I did pick myself up out of that rock bottom moment, I headed off in a new, wonderful direction, and I've never looked back.
Just when you're listening to stories help other people, and when you're listening to that people are putting themselves in your position, I know they are. Like, I know people in my family and me, like I just don't want, I just think that that's something everyone needs to think about, and it's the time thing. So I think a lot of people reevaluated during the pandemic because they actually had the time to think about, what way am I spending my life? Like, I know I did. What am I doing here? So and we don't want that time to have to come through a health scare. So I suppose that people are listening, perhaps it's dedicating that time that Georgie's talking about in a day. If it's your lunch break where you need that time to go for a walk and reflect, or is it in the evening when you're normally with your laptop on your knee? Hear me saying this to you, like, and that's how I'm living my life, with the laptop on the knee till 11 at night. But I don't want to be that way. I don't want this. So that's why I love the podcast, love people like you sharing this, because it revitalizes you, remotivates you to make a change. So talk to us then. So you moved into it and started to think about your own business then. You talked about when you told Jamie that you would like to do this, and what did he say to you?
Yeah, so it was a year after my diagnosis. I got signed off by my medical team. Everyone said I could go back to work, and I was getting ready to go back to work in Spin. Now, I was the entertainment editor for Spin at this stage, so I had to go back and talk about One Direction, Taylor Swift. Like, I'd been gone from the office for 18 months. It was like I had a brain transplant. I was a completely different person. So I was like, Jesus Christ, how am I going to go back and do my old job? And then a week before I was due to go back, I got a call from the news editor to say, hey, a new role has come up in 98 FM to read the breakfast news. And I was like, oh my God, that's my job. That's my dream job. That's the one I wanted for 10 years. I'll go for it. But I said I'll never get it because I've been gone for 18 months. And if I didn't get it so I hadn't had it all figured out at this point. was like, if I didn't get it when I was working so hard, why would they give me the job now? So I went for the interview, and guess what? I got the job. And I thought to myself, they feel sorry for me. I'm still in my wig. I'm in my recovery. You know, they're giving me this job because they want to help me. You know, that's really nice of them. But I said, once I get back in, you know, I'll prove to them that I'm worthy of the job. But then I went in my first day. 3 hours later, it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh my God, I didn't get this job because they feel sorry for me. I got this job because I'm a different person. I'm putting out different energy into the world. I believe in myself. I have more confidence. I trust myself. I'm worthy of this job. And the reason that all of that happened was because in those 18 months, I got to know who I really was, and I valued myself. And, that was the payoff of the personal development, was the dream job. But as I went back in, and I spent 6 months in the newsroom, and I loved it. I loved the people, the power of human connection after being cut off from the world for so long was amazing. But I'd started a little side hustle. I remember looking around. I worked in, the News Talk office. So it's News Talk, Today FM, 98 FM and Spin. I remember I looked up one day, and you'd often see people coming in for interviews, and a really busy office. And I remember thinking, actually, where do women go to tell their stories? Because, yeah, we might get a 12-minute slot on the Pat Kenny show, and that's amazing, but that's not enough time as a woman for me to tell my story. And actually, I've just heard this great interview for 12 minutes, but I want more. I want to dig deep on the insights. I want to know how this woman survived the tough times and how she put it all back together. But often you don't have time in a short interview to get to the good stuff. So I was like, if no one else is telling women's stories on a podcast, why don't I do it? So I wanted the word glow to be in it because I felt like in my recovery I got my glow back. I went home to Jamie, and it was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done. I said to Jamie, he was cooking the dinner, and I said, I think I'm going to start a podcast. And that couple of seconds that you wait for someone's reaction. And he turned around and he looked at me and he said, that is exactly what you should do. And that was the moment that my life changed forever.
Recently, I've been doing some research on different conditions, family, things that are going on in different health conditions online. And, it's very hard sometimes to find the right information. And definitely my go-to now is Mars Pharmacy. I found Mars online during COVID actually, and started to follow the owner, Una, and all the unreal advice she was given for everyday issues that we all experience, educating us on things that are going on in everyday life, but we just don't know the facts and how to treat those things and how to, what we should be doing, and just unbelievable education really. And that started my relationship with Mars way back a few years ago. And we're absolutely delighted that they're now the partner for the Dig podcast. And you're going to hear a little bit more about them today.
Our hormone health is a key element of our overall health and well-being, and our team at Mars are here to support you on this journey. You may be supporting a child through puberty, planning to start a family, or beginning your menopause journey. But no matter what stage of life you're at, it's important to arm yourself with the knowledge and information relating to your hormone health. Our expert team are on hand to advise and support you in relation to your wellness queries. Visit mars.ie or contact us on our social media for more information and guidance. And don't forget that we also ship to Northern Ireland. And you can enjoy 15% off all full price items on mars.ie with the code DIG15. All orders are packed with care by our warehouse team, enjoying free delivery over €45.
Thank you so much for that, Una. And now back to our guest on the Dig podcast.
Sometimes that can go either way when you tell a family member or someone that cares about you that you're taking a risk and that you're going to do these things. And sometimes it can have the opposite effect where it deters you if they say the wrong thing. Like I used to be an occupational therapist, and I left my job to open a kids' clothes shop in our local town, and my mum like begged me, like, don't leave your good job, don't wreck the stability that is sitting there for you that you've studied so hard for. And I tell this all the time. She doesn't mind me saying, because she just was worried, and she just was of that older generation where she's like, you've studied so hard, don't you leave that. And then my dad was like, you go for it, he'd be more entrepreneurial or whatever. But like I had my shop for 12 years and learned the best skills of my life in that retail store that have actually led me to this now. So I said that to Mummy all the time. She said, no, it's just afraid. But I often think of that sliding doors moment. If Jamie had said, you've worked so hard with this job in the radio, maybe you should, it's all about sort of life taking you in those, do you ever think about that? Like if he had said don't, would you be where you are now? I don't know.
Yeah. So like I knew what the right thing to do was, which was to start a podcast. Like we have the answers. Sometimes we look for that external validation just to, prove a point to ourselves or to give us that extra shove. So if you have an idea, go find the most positive person you know and tell them first.
Okay. That's a good idea.
We know what answer we're going to get from people.
Yeah. That's true.
So choose the people you tell very carefully. And there's a lot of people that I tell my stories to. And then in my personal life, I know what answers I'm going to get from people. So I choose carefully now. I don't put myself out there as much anymore with my ideas because they're special and they're precious and I know they're good. So I'm going to go find people who will encourage me to tell those stories to. And don't tell your stories to people who maybe won't encourage you. I hope that makes sense.
That's such a good tip because I know when my mum would be fearful of my craziness and manic life sometimes and the things that I'd be at. So I would now hold back. You're right. I've made that conscious decision. And then I tell her when things are going good, I'm like, oh, I would do this.
Yeah. But anyway, she goes, oh God, thank God you didn't tell me at the time, but I'm
glad to be saying, don't you be doing that. But anyway, so that's a good tip for people too, because sometimes then people, they pitch their ideas and their dreams and then somebody's like, oh, that's dangerous. And then they step back. So you're right. That's a really good tip for people. So then you thank God Jamie said what you needed him to say and knew he was going to say it. But so then you moved into this new space of your own business and you left your job. Was that hard to make that actual break? Because there's people listening to the Dig podcast, and actually a big topic this series is career change and taking the step of moving out of that secure job. Was that hard for you to actually take the leap then to leave?
Yeah, it was. I did have my side hustle. I knew that I could. I had a figure in my mind of how much I needed to make from the Good Glow. Now, I was a radio journalist. I wasn't making that amazing money. So I knew that if I could just match that, if I could just get to that figure, then that's enough for me. So I remember I got the second season of my podcast sponsored. And that was going to take me to a certain amount. And then I was doing a few little corporate talks. So I knew I could get to the figure through booking a few corporate talks. And I had an agent at the time, Dave, and he's still my agent, and we used to meet up and have coffees. And I'd say, do you think you can get me that figure from my sponsorship deals? And if you can, I'll leave. And I remember I was going for this job to be a VHI wellness ambassador. So it was a year-long contract with them. And I really, really, really wanted it. I went on holiday. I took parental leave because my head was so scrambled about what to do. Do I choose my head or my heart? My head was in radio. My heart was in the Good Glow. And I went away and I asked for a sign. And I got my sign. And I was like, oh, shit.
I want that sign. Go away.
Yeah. So I got the sign. And then I was like, oh God, everything is telling me to quit my job. And I said, but if I just got the VHI contract, if I could just get that, then I'll definitely leave. And it came to a point where I realised I'm not going to get the answer on the VHI contract unless I make the decision that's in my heart first. Because I believe that the next door won't open until you close the first door. So I went into 98. I handed in my resignation. And I got an email a couple of days later to say that my resignation was accepted. I was in town. And that was at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the day. And then at 4:15, the email came, you got the job with the VHI. And I remember thinking to myself, I made the job to quit first. And that was what I needed to do before the next door opened.
Yeah. And like that thing that you said, like a lot of people that you talked, well, not a lot of people, but I've talked to some people about career change, and they do talk flippantly about you just got to go for it and you just got to do it. But you talked about something there that a few entrepreneurs on here have talked about calculated risks, as in you made sure that you were financially able to before you actually did that, because that's important, isn't it? Like I don't want people when they're listening thinking, oh, it's all right for them to just say leave your good job. It's absolutely not. That what you just said there, I think is key to making sure that you actually are financially able, because we have all responsibilities now, and so that's important too, isn't it, to make sure you actually can match the money that was coming in.
Yeah, and my side hustle, like I speak to Jerry about this all the time, you know. Like people are asking me, should they quit their job? Should they go for it? And it's so easy to say, yeah, quit your job, follow your dreams. Like we have a mortgage to pay. I mean, I have a child. I can't just quit my job. But I started to put more energy into my side hustle than I was in my full-time job. And it came to a point where I realized that I couldn't give each of them like less than 100%. So I needed to choose. But yeah, I absolutely made sure that I was financially secure before I quit my job.
So important. I don't know if you know Brendan from Be Perfect, but he was on the podcast and he talked about that, you know, don't put all your, what did he say? Don't bet the house on it, or he said something anyway, don't put all your eggs in one basket, make sure you're ready and all of that. So I think that's important, because I don't want anybody listening thinking, oh, you know, just leave your good job. It's absolutely not about that. But, and I suppose you have to take action, and you only take action when you start putting plans in place. There's so much more in that conversation. But when you did then, you know, leave your job and embrace the good glow, you got into that cycle that we all get into. I'm not talking about straight away, but of burnout, like becoming so consumed by your brand and your business that you were just overwhelmed with work. Am I right in saying that? I know we didn't talk about that in the prep call, but I read about that on a news article that you were doing an interview on, because that's a stage a lot of people that are listening to the podcast are at, Georgie, because I know, because I mentor people and I'd be at it myself many a day. So talk to us about that and how you broke that cycle, or even tried to break it.
Yeah, so like Jamie really supported me, my husband, in making a go of the good glow. He ran media businesses for years. So he was the CEO of Spin Southwest. And at this point, he was the CEO of the Lovin Media Group, which was a highly successful digital business. So I remember the first day that I quit my job, I sat at my kitchen table and I was like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, because I'm not recording a podcast until tomorrow. So, and I sat at my desk and I had nothing to do. But then it quickly became a lot and things started to grow really fast. And I did my first little show in the Stellar Theatre in Rathmines, and 150 people came. This was the year of COVID. And so this was January. And I remember my agent Dave saying, okay, we're going to do the concert hall next, the National Concert Hall, 1,000 people. I was like, Jesus, okay, are you sure? Like, so we announced that then a week later. And I remember all of these people started sending me DMs to say, I can't buy tickets, the website is down. And we were trying to figure out what had happened. And I rang Dave and I was like, Dave, what's going on? He's like, I think you crashed the National Concert Hall website. And I was like, oh, surely not. Now, I'd worked with websites and, you know, I had knowledge of it. So I was like, if I crashed that website, like, that's a big deal. And I remember ringing Jamie and he was in a meeting and he was like, Georgie, what? Like, you know, when you sometimes ring your other half when they're in work and they're like, what are you ringing me for? I was like, Jamie, I think I crashed the National Concert Hall website. And maybe that was the moment for Jamie that he realised, oh, whoa, like this is bigger than we all thought it was. So anyway, we sold out the concert hall that day. And then we started to talk about bringing Jamie into the business because he is so amazing at what he does, at like growing businesses, at marketing, like all of these things that I was just so embedded in the content, the day-to-day content. So we came together. Jamie said, okay, I'll come on board for like a couple of months. I'll just help you set it up properly. And that was like 3 or 4 years ago now. And we've never looked back. And he is such a huge part of the business now.
And with that though came where you were working even harder now, working late at night, working round the clock. And how did you, is that part of breaking the cycle, bringing someone on that could take that load off? Or was there other things you did to help you manage the workload?
Yeah, I think that at this point now, the Good Glow has become our whole life. And 11 o'clock at night, sometimes we're talking about it. And then it started to just become too much for me. COVID happened. Obviously, that was like just as we were building like a lot of momentum in the business. And I was like, oh my God, what the hell are we going to do now? My business was obviously podcasting in studio with people. I was going out to, I had 25 corporate talks booked for that year. They all got cancelled in the same day. I was like, oh my God, my business is nothing now. We adapted like everyone did, and we pivoted. But then the negative self-talk started to come in, and the pressure was just so intense on me. And October 2021, I completely had a meltdown, and I went into Jamie and I said, if there was an ambulance at our front door, I would get into it. Now, this was like a normal night of us making the dinner. Everything was normal, but the voices in my head and the worry and the stress had become so overwhelming that I had to get down on my hands and knees in my house. And Jamie had no idea that is what my reality was. And that was another rock. So you don't just have the one rock bottom moment, throughout your life. We all know they come and they come again and again and again. But that was the rock bottom moment that I was like, no more. I am not letting my negative self-talk ruin my business. I can't. I've worked too hard. So I promised myself that day I was going to take control and become my biggest cheerleader, which was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
And that's a whole other podcast that maybe someday we'll explore that element. But I think everybody at some stage reaches that point, and maybe not as extreme or maybe more extreme, but that point is definitely something you can't ignore. So we don't want to get to that point. That's why we're listening to podcasts and we're listening to people like you and getting people like you into the workplace for the corporate talks. Georgie, can we talk about starting a podcast? So we talked about this actually in our call. How important is podcasting? It's a big thing now. Like I hear it a lot. I want to start a podcast. Obviously a lot of moving parts to a podcast that you and I both know, but how important is it for businesses, and is there any top tips for people to get started?
Yeah, I think the most important question I think we can all ask ourselves in any part of our life or our business is why. So you say to yourself, I want to start a podcast. Okay, why do you want to start a podcast? Get to the why. So I believe that every single business has the potential to have a podcast, not to be the next, Joe Rogan. Not that anyone wants to be him, but in terms of like the biggest podcast that you could have in the world, okay? It's a marketing tool. So say you're a nutritionist or a coach, and people are coming to your website and they're checking out things about your business and they're reading your bio. And I love that section on everyone's website, which is about, and you get to read like the purpose and the reason and all of these lovely things about people's businesses. But what if you had 6 little episodes and then potential customers who are coming to your website are, oh, okay, I'll have a listen to this. I remember I work quite closely with Revolving here in Dublin, their fertility clinic. And I was researching, I was trying to get a doctor onto the podcast to talk about fertility. And I just stumbled across their website, and there was like 6 podcasts with Dr. Hans, who was their chief medical officer. And in the podcast, he's speaking about, his passion for helping people grow their families and all of this amazing information about their business. At the end of those podcasts, I was like, I am completely bought in to Repromed and everything they do and their ethics and their core values. And that's simply, every business could do that on their website, even if you just have one. It's just another way to engage people, to bring them into your business and to really show them what you're all about.
I don't think people will have thought of it that way. I think they think maybe that it's to get the downloads, to get the growth and all, but actually it's just marketing for your business to the new people that land on your website. That's gold. So how do you get started? How basic can it be for people?
I would now, and I'm huge, like audio is my life, right? And it always has been with my background in radio. You need to have good sound. Let's just be honest, okay? If I'm putting on your podcast and I'm out for a run and I'm running down the road, but the levels are off and I can't hear it and the traffic is louder than your podcast, there's podcast studios everywhere. Get into a studio, let the experts take over. It will be a little bit of an investment, but you can do it. It's not too expensive. So what I would do is make sure your audio quality is really good. Make sure that people are on mic, that you can hear them properly, and you're not going to annoy people that when they're put in your podcast that they can't hear it. So it's just simple things like that. Ask the experts. If you're an expert in nutrition, no one's expecting you to be an expert in audio and podcasting. Like, go to the people that are the experts in that. Ask for help. Don't just think that, you can just plug in a microphone and get going. So it's about, like you said, Una from Mars Pharmacy, she's a connector. She's connecting people. Ask around. Ask the most positive person in your life with a podcast what to do and how to do it. And I think that's really important.
Amazing. So many people will be able to overcome that thought of wanting to and then just doing because of that. So thank you. The theme of the podcast series is all about thriving in business and life. And you and I know you can't separate work from life because they all affect each other. We're all working with different ways of working now, where actually our families are all like, Jamie works with you, your kids are coming along to different things. And also, how do you look after yourself? I know you're very much in that space, but what's the main thing that you do that you couldn't do without to help you thrive in your life, Georgie?
Oh, it's such a great question. And it comes back to the breakdown in October 2021. And when I picked myself up from that, I decided, I'm all about my personal development. That's how I got to this point. But now it needs to be elevated a little bit. I need to step it up a level. So I started cold water immersion. I started getting out into nature more. It's all the basics. But what I did was I empowered myself. I can't just expect to wake up every day and be full of motivation and confidence in my business. And I didn't just get here and now I live happily ever after. I woke up this morning and I felt a little bit low, and that can be down to so many different things, like your hormones, what time of the month it is, the weather, the light. And I have to do things to keep myself on the straight and narrow now. So I have to do affirmations. I have to, yesterday when I woke up, I felt a little bit down. I talk about this invisible string sometimes just pulling me down a little bit. I had to put on a song with my baby and dance around the kitchen. I know that sounds mad, but they're the things that I have to do to change my energy. And in 2021, I started to create a toolbox for myself. And I hate the word toolbox.
Works though. I hate it too, but you do.
It does. It's the boring part, I think, of self-care and wellness, like the practical side. It's not about signs. It's not about all of the trusting the universe. It's about the practical work. And now I know if I am so anxious that all I need to do is turn my shower to cold for 15 seconds and I'm going to change my energy, go out for a run, do all of these simple things that help me believe in myself more. And that's a work in progress every single day for me.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. You have to work on it every day. This is not easy. this life, you have to work for it to be the best or be better, is what Jerry keeps saying. He's ringing in my ears. Don't say best. Don't say best. So yeah, that's so good. I'm asking everybody that. The last question on the podcast is, how do you look after yourself? I need to ask myself that question. It's not good. Like I can't think of one thing that I do. That's really bad, isn't it? I like to spend time with family, but I mean, for me, I can't think of anything that I do, and I need to change that narrative.
Yeah. But I just say as well, like, I don't take things as personally anymore when it comes to my business. And now I'm all about adding in layers. So I never stay still in the good glow. And I learned that from radio, because I was stagnant for 10 years and I could see that I never progressed. So I have my podcast, The Good Glow, but I also have 2 other podcasts, Soul Sisters and Better Days. Now, people have said to me, are you mad? You have a really successful podcast. Why would you start another one? So I look at my business now as levels of a department store. And all the time I'm adding in new levels. So I have my corporates on level 4. I have my products and my merch on level 3. I have the Good Glow. The Good Glow podcast is my heart and soul. My baby is on level 1. Now, sometimes it hurts me that people just want to go to level 3 and level 4 and they skip by the Good Glow. Like that's how personal it is to me. But I have to, if I want to survive and I want to keep going and I want to grow my business, I need to keep adding levels, and I need to not take it personally if people don't stop by my heart and soul. And that's how I also distance myself from my business, that I separate myself from it. I have to just keep growing, keep going, and keep evolving. And that is the most important thing to me. And every year I say, okay, what's the focus this year? And for us this year, it's events, it's experiences for people. And that is taking me away a little bit from my heart and soul, the Good Glow, but that's okay. That's okay to do that. So I just wanted to say that before, because I think we just get so caught up in the heart and soul of the business sometimes, and it's blocking us from growing.
And you're going to New York, that's that experience that you're given and bringing people along for that life experience. You're going to do the marathon, isn't that right? Very soon?
Yeah, we're bringing 180 people to New York with us on Team Good Glow to run the New York Half. And that came from, October 21, telling myself I need to get out, do more running. So I enrolled in the New York Half Marathon in 2022. And when I was standing at the start line, I was like, why don't we bring people to this next year? And now it's one of the biggest parts of our business. And that came from personal development. That came from going for a run. So those little moments of self-care and wellness that we infuse into our week can be so beneficial for our professional life too.
About opening your mind to opportunity, right? Like who would have thought that your podcast, when you started it, would now bring you to the New York Marathon with all your tribe with you? Like amazing. It's too short. Maybe someday, maybe in the next series, it's too short because there's loads of wee things that's like, let's talk about that. But at the end of the day, I want to give people bite-sized chunks that they can start to take away and be actionable with from that podcast today. So thank you so much. Thank you for being a guest. Thank you for opening your mind to embracing someone that you've no clue about and taking a leap of faith and being here this morning. It means so much and will mean so much to the listeners as well, Georgie. Good luck in the marathon, your son, woman and your wee kids and all. Just what a story, and thank you for sharing it with us all. Thank you to everybody for listening to the Dig podcast this week. Don't forget, if you can subscribe on YouTube if that's where you watch, or if you like to follow, or if you like to listen on Apple and Spotify, then follow there as well, because it helps me reach people like Georgie, and then when she'll let me know about the podcast then because of the growth of it. So thank you for doing that, and it helps us help more people in the world of work, which is the aim of the Dig podcast.
Oh, and I love your podcast, and keep going. And it is just so wonderful for, connection, especially with women. I think it's just amazing. So thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Georgie.